In the spring of 1940, Europe was not at peace. It was in suspension, a fragile silence stretched across the continent, not born from stability, but from anticipation. Armies stood facing each other across borders that had not yet been tested. Governments waited for decisions they could not yet fully understand. And civilians, from Paris to London to Berlin, sensed that something enormous was approaching. Even if no one could define its shape, France stood at the center of this tension, a nation shaped by memory, a nation still defined by the First World War. For France, that earlier war was not history, it was identity. Nearly every family had lost someone. Entire regions of the country had been devastated by trench warfare. Cities had been destroyed and rebuilt. Generations of officers had grown up inside that trauma, learning one lesson above all others. Never again should France allow itself to be invaded so easily. From that belief emerged one of the most ambitious defensive systems ever constructed, the Maginot Line, a vast network of underground fortresses, artillery bunkers, command centers, rail systems, and reinforced tunnels stretching along France's eastern border. To French politicians, it symbolized security. To the public, it symbolized protection, and to military leadership, it symbolized control over uncertainty itself. But war does not respect walls built for previous conflicts, because while France prepared to fight the last war again, Germany was preparing to fight an entirely new one, a war of speed, a war of coordination, a war designed not to break defenses slowly, but to collapse entire systems of command in days. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, the world witnessed the first full expression of this new doctrine. It was not a conventional invasion. It was a coordinated machine of armored divisions, air power, and rapid communication, designed to paralyze the enemy's ability to respond. Tank formations advanced faster than traditional infantry could follow. Air raids destroyed communication hubs before orders could be transmitted. Entire Polish formations were surrounded before they could even organize a coherent defense. Within weeks, Poland ceased to exist as an independent state, and yet in Western Europe, the war did not follow the same pattern. Instead, it froze. France and Britain declared war on Germany. But what followed was not immediate confrontation. It was waiting. French and British forces mobilized behind defensive positions, particularly the Maginot Line. Soldiers prepared for battle that never came. Weeks turned into months, months turned into silence. No major offensives, no decisive engagements, no movement that could define the direction of the war. Journalists called it the phony war, but inside military camps, it felt far more serious than that. It felt like pressure building beneath the surface of the earth, a pressure that would eventually explode somewhere and reshape the entire continent. Behind the German lines, Adolf Hitler studied this silence differently. For him, time was not neutral. It was a resource. And Germany was running out of it. Every day allowed the Allies to strengthen their position. British industry was expanding wartime production. French mobilization was increasing. New divisions were being formed, equipped, and trained. The longer Germany waited, the stronger its enemies became inside the German high command. However, confidence was not absolute. Many senior officers were deeply aware of the risks involved in a Western offensive. They remembered World War I. They remembered the Verdun. Ypres. They remembered how attacking France directly had led to catastrophic losses and strategic stagnation. General Wilhelm von Lepp warned that France was not Poland, and that any invasion in the West would become a prolonged and bloody struggle. Germany's army was modernizing, but it was not invincible. Its logistics system was still developing, its fuel and supply chains were limited. And despite its reputation, large parts of the army still relied heavily on horses for transport. A long war against both France and Britain could become a war of exhaustion, something Germany could not afford. But Hitler rejected this logic entirely. He did not want a long war, he wanted collapse. The initial German operational plan followed historical precedent, a large-scale invasion through Belgium, similar to the Schlieffen Plan of 1914. The goal was to bypass French fortifications and strike from the north. But Hitler rejected the idea. He believed the Allies expected exactly that maneuver. Predictability, in his view, meant defeat before the battle even began. At this critical moment, General Erich von Manstein introduced a radically different concept. Instead of striking through Belgium as the main axis of attack, Germany would send its armored forces through the Ardennes forest. At first glance, the idea appeared unrealistic. The Ardennes was dense, heavily forested, and filled with narrow roads and steep terrain. French intelligence considered it unsuitable for large-scale armored movement. It was assumed to be a secondary sector, not a battlefield for major operations, and because of that assumption, it was lightly defended. That assumption would become one of the most costly miscalculations in modern military history, because Germany was not looking for the easiest path. It was looking for the least expected one. As May 1940 approached, German forces began repositioning across the Western Front. The movement was carefully concealed. Armored divisions were transferred under strict radio silence. False troop concentrations were simulated in other regions. Reconnaissance efforts were deliberately misleading. Behind this screen of deception, Germany concentrated its most powerful units for a decisive strike. The objective was not simply territorial gain. It was systemic collapse. To destroy the enemy's ability to understand the battlefield faster than it could react to it. On May 10, 1940, the offensive began. German forces crossed into Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. At first, the Allied response appeared to confirm expectations. French and British armies advanced rapidly into Belgium to meet the German attack. It was a confident, organized movement based on previous war planning. But it was also exactly what Germany wanted, because while Allied forces moved north, the real invasion was unfolding in the Ardennes. Inside the Ardennes forest, German armored columns moved slowly, but relentlessly. The terrain created massive logistical challenges. Roads became congested. Traffic jams stretched for kilometers. Fuel consumption increased dramatically. And movement slowed to a crawl in some sectors. But despite these obstacles, the advance continued. Because the French did not intervene in force. There were no large-scale airstrikes. No coordinated artillery bombardment. No attempt to halt the columns at critical choke points. The absence of resistance became as important as movement itself. It allowed Germany to maintain momentum through one of the most dangerous phases of the operation. By May 12, German forces reached the Meuse River. This river represented the final major natural barrier before the open plains of France. French commanders still believed they had time to reinforce. Time to reposition, time to stabilize the front, but that assumption was already outdated. On May 13th, the attack began. The Luftwaffe struck first. Stuka dive bombers descended in coordinated waves, targeting bunkers, artillery positions, and communication nodes. The psychological effect was immediate and severe. Soldiers described the noise of the aircraft as more terrifying than the explosions themselves. Command structures began to fail under pressure. Messages were delayed or never received. Entire units were left without instructions, and in that vacuum of command, German infantry began crossing the river. The crossing of the Meuse was not a single coordinated movement. It was a chaotic and desperate operation. Engineers launched inflatable boats under fire. Infantry crossed through water under machine gun fire. Others swam across exposed to artillery shells and air attacks. Despite heavy resistance, bridgeheads were established. Once these positions were secured, German armored units began pushing forward, and from this moment onward, the entire operational balance shifted irreversibly. French command began to collapse, not in a single moment, but in layers. First, communication failures. Then delays in orders. Then contradictory instructions. Finally, complete loss of situational awareness. Some units fought in positions already bypassed. Others withdrew without knowing the full situation, and many commanders simply lost contact with neighboring formations entirely. The battlefield was no longer structured. It was dissolving. At the same time, a massive civilian exodus erupted across northern France. Millions of people fled southward, not in organized evacuation, but in panic. Roads became completely blocked. Military logistics collapsed, supply convoys were trapped behind civilian traffic, entire regions became immobile, the army was no longer fighting just the enemy. It was fighting collapse from within its own infrastructure. German armored forces now advanced with increasing confidence. General Heinz Guderian enforced continuous movement. No pause. No consolidation. No delay. Speed was the decisive factor, because speed created confusion. And confusion destroyed resistance. By May 20th, German forces reached the English Channel. The Allied armies were split. More than 1 million soldiers were encircled in northern France and Belgium. The strategic disaster was complete. At Dunkirk, the situation reached its climax. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers gathered along beaches under constant aerial bombardment. Smoke filled the horizon. Explosions rocked the coastline. And then, unexpectedly, German armored forces halted. The halt order, its reasons remain debated, but its impact was decisive. It created a window of opportunity, a brief pause in which survival became possible. Operation Dynamo began, and against all expectations, it succeeded. More than 338,000 soldiers were evacuated across the English Channel, but France itself was already collapsing beyond repair. By June, Germany launched its final offensive. Case read. French resistance, though often courageous, was fragmented. Communication systems had broken down, command structures were disorganized, and German armored divisions moved faster than any attempt to stabilize the front. By June 14th, Paris was declared an open city. German forces entered without resistance. On June 22, 1940, France signed an armistice. In just 46 days, one of the most powerful nations in Europe had collapsed. Not slowly. Not gradually, but through a combination of speed, surprise, psychological shock, and systemic failure. Hitler stood victorious in Paris, but across the Channel, Britain remained, and from London, Charles de Gaulle issued a message of defiance that would echo far beyond the defeat. The war had not ended. It had only changed direction.